My name is Clara Bennett. I am 31 years old. Last night, I stood in the shadows at the back of my own $4.5 million penthouse in downtown Chicago, holding a single piece of paper that was about to destroy my parents' lives. In the center of the massive living room, under the glow of a custom crystal chandelier, my father, Robert, tapped a silver spoon against his champagne flute. The sharp sound cut through the murmur of 150 elite guests, corporate lawyers, tech executives, and the incredibly wealthy, influential family of my younger sister's new fiancé. My mother, Susan, stood next to him, beaming with the kind of manufactured, camera-ready pride she reserved entirely for her favorite child. And there was Mia, my 28-year-old sister, the unmistakable golden child, radiant in a white silk designer dress that probably cost more than my first car. "Ladies and gentlemen," my father's voice boomed, his tone filled with false warmth, echoing off the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the glittering Chicago skyline. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate Mia and Julian's engagement. Susan and I wanted to give them something truly special to start their new life together, something that shows just how much we believe in them." He paused for dramatic effect. He always loved an audience. That is why, tonight, we are officially transferring the deed of this beautiful Gold Coast penthouse into Mia's name. It is yours, sweetheart. A wedding gift from us to you. The room erupted into applause. Mia gasped, covering her mouth with perfectly manicured hands, playing the role of the shocked, grateful daughter to perfection. Julian's wealthy parents nodded in clear approval, visibly impressed by my family's immense generosity. It was a beautiful, touching family moment. There was just one massive problem. My parents didn't own the penthouse. I did. I had bought it with my own money 2 years ago. My parents had secretly forged a deed transfer behind my back while I was out of the country, abusing an expired, extremely limited power of attorney. They actually thought they had pulled it off. They calculated that I wouldn't find out until it was too late, and that I would be far too embarrassed to make a scene in front of Julian's powerful, high society family. They had no idea that I was standing right there in the back of the room, and they certainly didn't know that tucked inside my black leather clutch was the master document of an irrevocable trust, a single, legally binding piece of paper that would not only evict my sister immediately, but threaten my parents with federal felony fraud charges. Before I tell you how I walked up to that microphone and tore their perfect night apart piece by piece, take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, but only if you genuinely connect with stories about justice, karma, and setting firm family boundaries. Also, where are you watching from right now and what time is it there? Drop a comment below and let me know. To understand the absolute audacity of my parents, to understand why they felt perfectly entitled to steal a multi-million-dollar property and hand it to my sister, I need to take you back to my childhood. I need to explain the hierarchy of the Bennett family. I grew up in Naperville, a comfortable, upper-middle-class suburb of Chicago. On paper, we were the picture-perfect American family. My father, Robert, was a mid-level regional manager at an insurance firm. He was a man obsessed with appearances and reputation. He bought luxury cars he could barely afford on lease, and he joined a local country club just to be seen having lunch there on Sunday afternoons. My mother, Susan, was a local real estate agent who cared more about the zip codes her clients lived in than the people themselves. And then there was Mia. Mia was born 3 years after me, and from the moment she took her first breath, the dynamic of our house shifted permanently. Mia had my mother's striking blonde hair and my father's natural, easy charisma. She was loud, demanding, and instinctively knew how to perform for whatever audience was in front of her. I, on the other hand, was quiet, observant, and preferred reading in my room or tinkering with computers to entertaining my parents' dinner guests. In my mother's eyes, quiet meant difficult. Observant meant sneaky. The differences in how we were treated weren't just subtle little preferences. They were structural. I fully realized this on my 12th birthday. I had asked for a very specific beginner's telescope. I loved astronomy, and I had been talking about this exact telescope for 6 solid months. When my birthday dinner arrived, my parents handed me a gift bag containing a generic gray sweater that was 2 sizes too big, clearly bought on a clearance rack. "We just didn't have the budget for toys this year, Clara," my mother told me, sipping her coffee without even looking at my face. "You need to be mature and understand how finances work." 3 months later, for Mia's 9th birthday, they rented out an entire local roller skating rink, hired a professional photographer, invited 40 kids, and bought her a brand new, expensive motorized scooter. When I quietly asked my father about the budget, he looked at me with cold, hard eyes. "Your sister knows how to appreciate things, Clara. When you start acting like a grateful daughter, maybe you'll be treated like one." That was the unwritten rule of the Bennett household. Mia was an investment. I was an expense. As we grew older, the gap only widened into a chasm. When Mia turned 16, there was a brand new white convertible sitting in the driveway with a massive red bow on it. When I turned 16, my father handed me a printed bus schedule and told me I needed to get an after-school job to pay for my own clothes and school supplies because they were tight on cash. So I did. I worked double shifts at a local diner on Route 59. I came home at 11 p.m. smelling like stale French fries and bleached countertops. I saved every single penny. I bought my own winter coats, paid for my own calculators, and eventually bought a beat-up 2008 Honda Civic for $2,000 in cash, just so I could get to my diner shifts faster. My parents never once asked how my shifts went. They never asked about my grades, even though I was taking advanced placement classes and pulling a 4.0 unweighted GPA. All dinner table conversations revolved entirely around Mia. Mia's cheerleading squad, Mia's prom dress, Mia's social drama. I was essentially a ghost haunting my own childhood home. The ultimate breaking point came when I was 18. It was the spring of my senior year of high school. I had applied to the University of Illinois at Chicago for their computer science program. I had been quietly coding websites and small software tools for local businesses since I was 15, and the tech industry was my escape route. I got in. Not only did I get in, but I was offered a partial merit scholarship. However, I still needed $8,000 to cover the rest of my first-year tuition and campus housing. I sat my parents down at the kitchen table one evening and presented my acceptance letter. I laid out a printed spreadsheet showing my savings from the diner, my scholarship amount, and the exact $8,000 gap. I respectfully asked them if they could help me with a loan, promising to sign a contract and pay it back with interest the moment I graduated and got a job. My father barely glanced at the paper. "We can't do that, Clara." "It's just a loan, Dad," I pleaded, my voice tight. "I'll sign a legally binding contract. I just need a start." My mother sighed heavily, folding her hands on the table with a look of extreme exhaustion. "Clara, please be reasonable. Mia is starting private SAT tutoring next month, and we are heavily saving for her college fund. She wants to go to a premier private university out of state. We simply cannot drain her resources for a state school degree that you probably won't even use. Her resources. The money they had been saving for years was strictly, exclusively for Mia. I was 18, I had worked my fingers to the bone, and I was entirely on my own. "So that's it?" I asked, my hands trembling as I stood up from the table. "You're just giving up on my future to fund her weekend tutoring?" "Don't be dramatic," my father snapped, his face turning red, his voice taking on that dangerous, quiet edge. "If you want to go to college so badly, figure it out. You've always been so independent, right? Prove it. And if you're going to disrespect your mother and me under our own roof, complaining about what we provide, maybe you shouldn't be living here at all." He didn't explicitly use the words, "get out." But he didn't have to. The message was crystal clear. I was a burden, an afterthought, a tenant who had officially overstayed her welcome. 2 days later, I packed everything I owned into 3 black trash bags and shoved them into the trunk of my beat-up Honda Civic. I didn't say goodbye. My parents were watching television in the living room as I carried my bags out the front door, the screen door slamming shut behind me. They didn't even turn their heads. Mia was in her bedroom, probably trying on clothes. I drove away from Naperville with $2,400 in my checking account, a tank full of cheap gas, and a singular burning realization. I had no family. I only had myself, and I was going to make them regret the day they counted me out. I spent the next decade building an empire from absolute scratch. It didn't happen overnight, and it certainly wasn't easy. I started a small software design firm from a tiny, cramped studio apartment in Chicago. I worked 16-hour days, fueled entirely by cheap coffee and the desperate, burning need to prove that I wasn't the failure my parents had decided I was. For the first few years, I took on any freelance coding job I could find. But eventually, I developed a proprietary project management tool designed specifically for mid-sized tech startups. That tool became my breakthrough. By the time I was 26, my company had 40 employees. By the time I was 28, I sold a 60% stake in my software firm for a multi-million-dollar buyout, retaining my position as CEO. I was officially a self-made multimillionaire before I turned 30. The very first thing I did with my new wealth was buy a $4.5 million top-floor penthouse in the Gold Coast neighborhood of Chicago. It was a stunning piece of real estate. Floor-to-ceiling windows, custom marble countertops, a wraparound terrace with panoramic views of Lake Michigan. But to me, it wasn't just an expensive apartment. It was a fortress. It was the physical proof of my independence, a monument to the fact that I had built a spectacular life without a single cent or word of encouragement from Robert and Susan Bennett. I never contacted my parents to tell them about my success. I didn't want their forced pride or their sudden, convenient interest. But you can't hide a multi-million-dollar buyout in the tech industry forever. When I was 29, a prominent Chicago business magazine ran a feature story on me. They put me on the cover with the headline, "From Suburbia to Silicon Valley, Chicago's Newest Tech Star." Less than a week after that magazine hit the stands, my phone rang. It was my mother. After 10 years of absolute silence, after 10 years of not knowing if I was alive, dead, homeless, or starving, my parents suddenly remembered they had a second daughter. The sheer audacity of their reappearance was staggering. They didn't apologize for kicking me out. They didn't ask about the decade of struggle. Instead, they played the role of the loving, proud parents who had always known I was going to do great things. "Clara, darling." "We saw the article," my mother cooed over the phone, her voice dripping with fake affection. "Your father and I are just so incredibly proud of you. We always knew you had that special spark. We'd love to come see this new penthouse of yours. We should catch up as a family." I should have hung up the phone. I should have changed my number. But a small, naive, and deeply broken part of me, the 18-year-old girl who just wanted a college loan, wondered if maybe, just maybe, my success had finally made me worthy of their love. So I let them back into my life. Not completely, but enough. I let them visit the penthouse. I let them brag to their country club friends about their genius CEO daughter. I even paid off a $30,000 debt my father had accumulated from a failed business venture. I thought I was buying their respect. I didn't realize I was just giving them the keys to rob me. The trap was set 6 months ago. My company was launching a major tech expansion in London, which required me to relocate to the United Kingdom for a solid 6 months. Before I left, I needed someone local in Chicago to handle basic, mundane tasks for the penthouse. Things like signing for certified mail, paying the local municipal property taxes, and managing the HOA fees while I was completely consumed with the European launch. Against every instinct I had, I asked my father to handle it. I had my lawyer draft a very limited, highly specific power of attorney. It only granted my father the legal right to handle utility bills, HOA disputes, and local municipal taxes for that specific property. It strictly stated that the power of attorney expired in exactly 6 months and did not grant him any authority to sell, transfer, or encumber the real estate. I went to London. I worked 80-hour weeks. I completely trusted that my Chicago affairs were being handled. But about 4 months into my trip, I noticed a discrepancy. I was checking my bank accounts remotely from a hotel room in London and saw a strange, unauthorized charge from a local Chicago municipal clerk's office for a deed transfer processing fee. My stomach dropped. I immediately called my father. He didn't answer. I called my mother. It went straight to voicemail. I didn't panic immediately, but the silence was deafening. I hired a private investigator back in Chicago to pull the public property records for my penthouse. When the investigator emailed me the PDF of the public records 2 days later, I sat in my London hotel room and stared at the screen until my vision blurred. My parents hadn't just paid a fee. They had forged my signature. They had taken that limited, expired power of attorney, paired it with a fraudulent quitclaim deed, and paid off a shady notary to officially transfer the legal title of my $4.5 million penthouse out of my name. And who did they transfer it to? Mia. My parents had stolen my home to give it to the golden child. As I dug deeper, the sick, twisted truth of their plan came to light. Mia had recently gotten engaged to Julian, a man whose family was incredibly wealthy, old money, generational wealth. My parents, desperate to impress Julian's family and prove that the Bennetts were of equal social standing, had decided that Mia needed a spectacular, multi-million-dollar wedding gift. Since they couldn't afford one, they simply decided to take mine. They calculated that since I was in London, I wouldn't notice the transfer until it was fully processed. And even if I did find out, they assumed I would be too afraid of public humiliation to drag my own family into a legal battle. They thought I would just take the loss to protect the family reputation. Have you ever had to stay completely silent while someone you loved plotted against you? Have you ever had to watch people you trusted try to destroy you, knowing you had to wait for the perfect moment to strike back? Tell me what you would do in that situation in the comments. Because what I did next required a level of cold, calculating patience I didn't even know I possessed. I didn't call the police. I didn't scream at them over the phone. Instead, I immediately flew back to Chicago in secret and walked straight into the office of Arthur Sterling, the most ruthless, shark-like estate lawyer in the city. Arthur reviewed the fraudulent quitclaim deed and the forged notary stamp. He looked at me over his glasses. "Clara, this isn't just a civil dispute. This is felony fraud. We can have them arrested right now." "No," I said, my voice eerily calm. "If we arrest them now, they'll just play the victims. They'll tell everyone it was a misunderstanding. I don't just want them arrested, Arthur. I want them humiliated. I want the entire world to see exactly who they are." Arthur smiled, a terrifying, brilliant smile. "Then we don't use the police yet. We use the master document. You see, my parents were arrogant, but they weren't smart. When I bought the penthouse 2 years ago, I didn't just put the deed in my personal name. On Arthur's advice, I had placed the property into an irrevocable trust. Legally, I didn't own the penthouse. The trust owned it, and I was the sole trustee and beneficiary. A fraudulent quitclaim deed signed with a fake power of attorney cannot legally override an irrevocable trust. My parents had essentially forged a document to transfer a property that didn't exist in the way they thought it did. Their fake deed was entirely worthless, but the act of forging it was still a massive federal crime. We drafted the eviction notices. We drafted the criminal fraud charges. And then I waited. I waited for the exact right moment to drop the bomb. And that moment arrived 2 months later, on the night of Mia and Julian's extravagant engagement party, a party my parents were hosting inside my penthouse. The party was a masterclass in performative wealth. Mia fluttered around the room, showing off her engagement ring, soaking up the praise like a sponge. My mother hovered near Julian's parents, the wealthy in-laws, laughing too loudly at their jokes and casually dropping references to the family's new Gold Coast property. I stayed in the back, near the coat check. I watched them perform. I watched them lie. At 8:30 p.m., the string quartet stopped playing. My father tapped his champagne glass again, stepping up to a small podium they had set up near the floor-to-ceiling windows. If I could have everyone's attention, Robert began, his voice thick with rehearsed emotion. Tonight is about family. It's about passing the torch to the next generation. Susan and I couldn't be prouder of Mia and Julian, and we want them to start their life together with absolute security. That is why we are so thrilled to officially give them the keys to this incredible penthouse. The room broke into applause. Julian kissed Mia's cheek. My mother wiped a fake tear from her eye. That was my cue. I didn't run. I didn't shout. I simply walked out from the shadows of the hallway and made my way through the crowd. I was dressed in a sharp, tailored black suit. The crowd parted slightly, people turning to look at the woman walking toward the front of the room with absolute terrifying calm. My father saw me first. His smile froze, morphing into an expression of sheer panic. He gripped the edges of the podium. My mother gasped, taking a physical step backward. Mia's jaw dropped. I walked straight up to the podium. "Excuse me, Robert," I said, my voice carrying clearly without a microphone. I reached out and gently took the mic from his rigid hand. I turned to face the 150 elite guests. The room was dead silent. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice steady and cold. "My name is Clara Bennett. I am Robert and Susan's older daughter, the one they forgot to invite tonight." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Julian's parents exchanged a highly confused, uncomfortable glance. "I wanted to personally congratulate Mia and Julian," I continued, pacing slowly across the front of the room. "And I also wanted to clarify a small legal misunderstanding regarding the generous gift my parents just announced." "Clara, stop," my father hissed, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. He stepped toward me, but I held up a hand, and something in my eyes stopped him dead in his tracks. "You see," I said, projecting my voice to the very back of the room, "my parents don't own this penthouse. They never have. I bought this property 2 years ago with money I earned from the tech company I built from scratch. A company I built after they kicked me out of their house at 18 for asking for a college loan." The silence in the room was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble floor. "A few months ago, while I was living in London," I continued, pulling the irrevocable trust master document from my clutch, "my parents decided they needed a spectacular gift to impress Julian's family. So they took an expired, highly limited power of attorney that was only meant for paying local municipal taxes, and they used it to forge a quitclaim deed." I held the document up high. "They paid off a shady notary, forged my signature, and attempted to legally steal a $4.5 million property from their own daughter to give to their favorite child." Mia let out a choked sob. "Julian, it's a lie. Tell her to leave," she cried, pulling on her fiancé's arm. But Julian wasn't looking at Mia. He was looking at his parents, who were staring at my father with absolute disgust. "It's not a lie, Mia," I said, my voice slicing through the tension. "And unfortunately for Robert and Susan, they made a massive, fatal error. They didn't know that when I bought this penthouse, I placed it into an irrevocable trust, a trust that I am the sole trustee of. You cannot override an irrevocable trust with a forged quitclaim deed." I turned to look directly at my parents. They looked like they were going to be sick. "Their fake deed is entirely legally worthless," I stated clearly, "but the act of forging a notary and a deed transfer, well, that is felony fraud." I reached into my clutch one more time and pulled out 2 thick manila envelopes. I handed the first one to my father. "This is a formal 30-day eviction notice for Mia and her belongings," I said, the words echoing in the silent room. I handed the second envelope to my mother, who was physically trembling. "And this is a draft of the criminal fraud charges my lawyer, Arthur Sterling, will be filing with the federal prosecutor's office on Monday morning." The fallout was instant and catastrophic. Julian's father, a man who valued reputation above all else, stood up immediately. He didn't say a word to my parents. He simply looked at his son, nodded toward the door, and said, "We are leaving. Now." Julian looked at Mia, his expression a mix of shock and betrayal. He pulled his arm away from her grasp and followed his parents out the door. The wedding was over before it even began. Within 5 minutes, the entire room emptied. Nobody wanted to be associated with a family about to be indicted for felony real estate fraud. It was just the four of us left in the massive, glittering living room. My mother collapsed onto a custom velvet sofa, sobbing uncontrollably. Mia was screaming, throwing a champagne flute against the wall, demanding to know how I could ruin her life. My father, the man who had always been so large, so intimidating, suddenly looked small and pathetic. He walked over to me, tears streaming down his face. "Clara, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "Please don't do this. We're your family. We made a mistake. We got carried away, but we're blood. If you file those charges, I'll go to prison. I'll lose everything." I looked at the man who had handed me a bus schedule when I was 16. I looked at the man who had told me to get out of his house when I was a desperate 18-year-old girl asking for a chance at an education. "You're right, Dad," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "You are going to lose everything. But you're not my family. You stopped being my family the day I left your house with garbage bags. Clara, we're begging you," my mother cried from the sofa. I looked at her and I quoted the exact words my father had said to me all those years ago. "If you want to stay out of prison so badly, figure it out. You've always been so independent, right? Prove it." I turned around and walked out of my penthouse, leaving them alone in the wreckage of their own greed. The fallout began the very next morning. By 9 a.m. on Monday, Arthur Sterling had officially filed the paperwork with the county prosecutor's office. He didn't just submit the forged quitclaim deed, he submitted the time-stamped emails, the expired power of attorney, and the authentic, irrevocable trust documents. The evidence was absolute, undeniable, and devastating. When you commit real estate fraud involving a multi-million-dollar property, the system does not move slowly. By Wednesday, a formal criminal investigation had been opened into Robert and Susan Bennett for felony forgery and wire fraud. The social consequences, however, moved even faster than the legal ones. Some fallouts destroy, others clarify. Mine did both. Julian's family, terrified of being associated with a federal criminal investigation, completely severed ties. Julian broke off the engagement via a 3-line text message to Mia and blocked her number immediately. The spectacular high society wedding my parents had been bragging about to their country club friends vanished into thin air. By the end of the week, the whispers had taken over the Naperville suburbs. People talk, and in wealthy suburban circles, news of a fraud investigation travels faster than wildfire. My father was asked to voluntarily step down from his position at the insurance firm. His boss cited a breach of ethical conduct. My mother's real estate agency completely dropped her, quietly removing her face from their website overnight. They had spent their entire lives obsessing over their reputation, sacrificing their own daughter to protect their image, and in the end, it was their own greed that completely destroyed it. A month after the party, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I knew who it was. I let it go to voicemail. 5 minutes later, an email arrived from my father. The message was desperate. It was a complete reversal from the arrogant, cruel man who had kicked me out at 18. He wrote that they were facing immense legal fees, that they couldn't afford the high-powered defense attorneys required to keep them out of federal prison. He begged me to drop the charges. He said, "Clara, please, we are still family. Blood is blood. Don't let your mother and me go to jail." I read the email 3 times. I didn't feel triumph, and I didn't feel satisfaction. I just felt an overwhelming sense of clarity. I replied with 2 sentences. "You stopped being my family the day you told me to pack my garbage bags. I am not dropping the charges. Figure it out yourselves." I never spoke to them again. To avoid jail time and pay for their massive legal defense, Robert and Susan were forced to liquidate everything. They had to sell the beautiful, pristine Naperville home where I had grown up, the home they had kicked me out of. They sold my father's leased luxury cars. They emptied the precious savings accounts they had hoarded for Mia. In a desperate plea deal to avoid federal prison, they accepted 5 years of intense probation, massive financial restitution to the state, and permanent felony records. They moved into a tiny, cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. As for Mia, the golden child was suddenly left with absolutely nothing. No rich fiancé, no penthouse, and no parents to fund her lavish lifestyle. For the first time in her 28 years, she had to get a minimum wage job to support herself, facing the exact same struggles she and my parents had once mocked me for. Today, it has been exactly 1 year since that night at the penthouse. I am standing on my wraparound terrace, looking out over the glittering skyline of Chicago, feeling the cold breeze off Lake Michigan. The penthouse is completely quiet, and for the first time in my life, I feel an absolute, unbreakable sense of peace. If I look at my own story through a psychological lens, there is a concept called conditional self-worth, the belief that you are only valuable if certain people approve of you. I spent the first 18 years of my life trapped in that belief. I thought my parents' indifference was proof that I didn't matter. But what actually saved me wasn't my multi-million-dollar tech company, and it wasn't this penthouse. It was the moment I realized that I didn't need their permission to exist. I didn't need their validation to know my value. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones who hurt you the most. They will tell you that blood is blood to trap you into accepting their toxic behavior. But family is not just about DNA. Family is about respect, about the people who show up for you when everything falls apart, and about the people who choose to love you without conditions. I didn't destroy my parents. I just stopped protecting them from the consequences of their own actions. Setting boundaries isn't revenge, it's survival. If you are listening to this right now, and you are in a situation where your family makes you feel like you need to shrink yourself to be acceptable, like you are the difficult one just for asking for basic respect, I want you to hear me clearly. You do not owe your life to people who treat you like an afterthought. You have every right to walk away. You have every right to set ironclad boundaries. Your worth is not defined by the people who failed to see it. Thank you for staying with me through this entire story. If my journey resonated with you, if you have ever had to build your own life from the ground up after being underestimated, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment below telling me your story. I read every single one of them, and don't forget to check the description for more stories about setting boundaries and finding your true self. Until next time, keep fighting for your peace. See you soon.